Hey there. Hi. Today's episode, Imagine Dragons, is not about the musical group. I believe I may have heard a sampling of their songs. However, it is about the whole side of coming out as a starseed, or my preference as trans-dimensional. I was watching a coming out video today, and it's a particular topic of interest for me, being both queer and star-seeded. And there was a discussion about the labels and whether it was really necessary to participate on that level, if that for some folks, the idea of a unity consciousness, transcends the use of certain labels for identities, and I thought that was extremely valid. And through self-determination, I think most people are going to arrive at an understanding of their very complex identity, and it can be described with a lot of different reference points, since we're trans-dimensional. So what I specifically wanted to talk about in regards to the reptilian is the fact that we're all related to the reptilian, through the inheritance of our reptilian brain. And so some of the stuff that I've seen online, the polarity of like, oh, it's these bad people doing these bad things, and we're the good people, and it's it's the polarity is not of interest to me. Rather the owning of that inheritance and the responsibility that has, and the management of it, and the complexity, because there is no, we're a mix here, of many divine origins. For that purpose, I just wanted to share a story today in regards to some of my own, story around my own inheritance, as well as a coupling with the whole conceptual reptilian inheritance, and that is like as a kid. And I mentioned this before. I was at a young age communing with disembodied and very encouraging, loving spirits along my development and spiritual path, and it was an incredible comfort to me, and I interpreted it in my younger days as this is prayer, this is me and God talking. My experience with dragons and dinosaurs and things at that time, like, I probably wasn't that much into dinosaurs in comparison to dragons, because dragons had like a theme song like Puff the Magic Dragon, or there was like a really great Disney thing, Pete and the Magic Dragon, great stuff like that. So they weren't really the same thing in my mind, and I really wasn't studied on the mythologies of the world at that time when I was super young yet. And so for me, I've always just thought the dinosaur thing was overdone, and I was never really interested in it. Yeah, I'd rather have a Godzilla, who's not a dinosaur, by the way. I'd rather have like a Godzilla or a King Kong or something like that. And I have not even seen any of the Jurassic Parks. Not interested, just none. So my affinity, if you're looking at the sort of scale of reptilianism, was really more in alignment with birds. Birds were big, especially the raven was a huge thing growing up. Our these series of Catholic schools that my whole family attended. The raven was this icon, this spirit. It was also the spirit of Saint Benedict, a helper for Saint Benedict. And raven has continued to play a role in my spiritual development. So I'm way more on the bird side of things, I want to say, which are reptiles. So growing up, again, no real affinity with reptiles per se. I love geckos and and things like that. And I never had like on the other side, I should say, I never had like oh God, reptiles, whatever. That never bothered me either. In fact, I once house sat for which had a basement full of boa constrictors. As a medicine man, a shaman friend of mine. So I had to make sure that they got fed. Someone came over and would give them a mouse every couple of days. So, so there was never like, a strong thing either way. It wasn't repulsed or whatever. It's just they're part of the animal kingdom. And I always thought the snake got a bad rap in the whole, origin of Adam and Eve. And I was really glad to learn more of the Celtic history around it, and, the St. Patrick and the snakes and all that, whatever. So, so it was really, I want to say like this in 1995, I had, an experience of prolonged pronoia, and if you're not experienced with pronoia, it was part of a jump for me to experience this pronoia, which is the opposite of paranoia. It's rather not where you're seeing the outside world as wanting to harm you. You're actually seeing it the other way. You're actually seeing the outside world as very encouraging and loving and helpful and its unfolding. And actually that's a conspiracy that you don't know about it, that you're supposed to just sort of play along. So I actually spent months in this state, and it's a very divine, playful state to be in, much like how children are. And during this time, I accepted the call, and I accepted the call at that time was really to connect more with my intuition and follow more of my intuitive guidance, in the living of my life as part of a spiritual development. So I took what Rob Bresney, determined astrologer Rob Bresney, had a column one day, Quantum Leap of Faith. It's the combination of the quantum leap and the leap of faith. So I took that quantum leap of faith. And within the journey for many years, and here's how it relates kind of back to the dragons, I kept encountering this name George. This name George kept coming up. George. Weird, I'd go somewhere and meet someone. They'd turn around and introduce themselves, and I'd almost know before they would say, I'm like, "What's your name?" And they say George, and I'm like, "I knew it." Like there's Georges like everywhere. So this name was really in my environment. And I mean, I've had a friend named George, but we had been out of contact for many years. So I just thought like, maybe, I didn't know what to think of it. I just thought it was funny. And around the same time, not too long later, we elected a president with the same name. But so that kind of little thing continued, and then around 2003, I determined to do a traditional Lakota vision quest. I'd put myself up before in an altar. This time, I was doing it in a very traditional manner in the tradition that I was studying at the time. And while in my altar, and we were out in the middle of the desert, I was up on a cliff. There where I noticed within the rock formations around me as I was in my altar praying, and I'm alone and no one else is around, and the rock formations around me took on or rather revealed an appearance of being these dragons that looked either dead or asleep or whatever, but they were there. I think they weren't. I think like one of them would like kind of open his eye from time to time, kind of like just like slow, like trying to get like a little snapshot on what was going on. It's a very powerful ceremony, and I had prayers for that altar specifically, to where when the dragon showed up, I was like, what does that have to do with the Lakota spiritual tradition? I just was like, I kind of, they were there and I recognized them, but at the same time kind of ignored them because I had sort of this agenda, and I didn't go into a lot of questioning about like, why are these dragons here until afterwards, and when I went into the sweat lodge, and I mentioned it to the medicine person who was running the ceremony, and there wasn't like a lot of forthcoming information, but that's fine, because when I walked out into there was, but it wasn't like in that particular moment. No one said this is what it all means. Actually, the meaning begins to birth itself, because once I leave the lodge and I rejoin the group, and we still have people up in altars that we're waiting on to come down. Somebody in the supporter circle that was in the camp was reading a book based on the life of Saint George, the Dragon Slayer, which I picked up because I was like, what? Like maybe this was I tuning into this from my altar that somebody was reading this, and I browsed through it, and I was kind of perplexed because I was raised Catholic and I didn't remember anything about a Catholic saint for dragon slaying. Like that just seems so weird to me. I was like, what the hell? So I just kicked that thought out. I had to make some notes. I kicked that thought out. Didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to it, and I just sort of chalked up the appearance of dragons in my altar as my Lakota altar as a sign of maybe what was going on in my subconscious in the months leading up, and in the preparation. I'd picked up and read a book that my partner had recommended, one of the David Icke books, and he talks about the reptilian agenda and different things, and he had some experiences in there that I could relate to. That was my first introduction to this concept, this particular concept as he presents it. So I just was like, that's probably what it was. And I didn't really think too hard. And I kind of stopped looking, I think, at a certain point. And then I got a refresher a little bit. It came back into my conscious mind when I found myself living in this part of this. I was living in St. George at a certain point in the year 2012. I found myself living in Staten Island. I decided to go back to college and finish my degree, get a master's. And so I found a program in New York, and I was looking for a place to live. And so I ended up renting a place from my uncle and his friends. They have properties on Staten Island, and it's in a neighborhood called St. George. And it just so happens that every year the people in my uncle's community help with the St. George Festival. And if you're familiar at all with the mythology of St. George, that he was a soldier who was Christian, who defied the emperor of the time, who was outlawing Christianity, and he defied it, and he stood strong for his faith, and he was beheaded as a result. And then he was mythologized, and there are a lot of countries that have these certain symbols that are St. George is our patron saint. That red cross that you'll see a lot, it's used in Britain. Britain is big St. George territory. But in this St. George festival that this community put on every year, they rewrote the ending so that it wasn't about a dragon slaying. It was actually a coming together, and he and the dragon and St. George become friends. And there's big puppets, and they do this for kids, and I guess that's part of the reason they got rid of the ending. They wanted to make it a happy ending and not scare away the kids. And it's a big art festival, and it's adorable. So it's it's around St. George's feast day in April every year, Staten Island, in case you want to go. And so it was that I'm in a new relationship. I have a new partner and a new book that recommended to me, and it just so happens around this time that I ended up moving with my partner, leaving St. George, but is still in New York. And my partner had a book to he was giving it to him. His therapist gave it to him, and he was like, "You should read it," because it had to do with past life regressions and this certain doctor's experiments with them, and his reflections on it, and what he found out. It's a fascinating book. Many Lives, Many Masters. Very interesting read. And past life regression wasn't anything I wasn't, I'd had done it when I was a little kid and saw some stuff, but I hadn't really done it in a while. So I just basically do it myself. I'll just find, I'll get an audio thing, and I'm good at putting myself in altered states. And I'll go in with a really focused question. It could be maybe I want more clarity on a relationship, a friend, like it is for my partner. I wanted to know these lives that we've shared together, what our connection was. And afterwards, I was able to relate to him in a much more fuller way, and it really, my love for him increased as a result, because I saw these, lifetimes we had together, and I'm like, wow, we found each other again. So regardless of what happens in this lifetime, I found you. It's great. I'm going to celebrate that. That's what's important, and that's the focus. And at the time I had that he gave me the book, I had a health issue, and that was really the prevalent thing in my mind. And so I decided to do around that. Can you give me information about what this is, and are there lives and energies attached to this that can help clear these? And I was shown multiple lifetimes, and one in which this is, and this is me just, starting to do the self-regression. And I have this lifetime as a dragon, in which this injury also occurred. So it's like lifetimes here on Earth, and then lifetimes in this other dimension. And it was I was like, whoa, that was weird, and I don't know what to think about that. And then afterwards, I just noticed that I had a healing response, a very a profound one. And then it was a couple years later that through another ceremony, healing ceremony that I offered to someone I dearly love, and I opened myself up to a divine I would say divine intervention. Actually, yes, because what I was asking for was actually to help. What I was offering, I was actually needing for myself as well. So the healing that I was participating in, the fullness of the healing is that I too am healed. So the healing that I offered, and the portal that I opened, and what came through me, which took me a little while to decipher because I had to do some research. Because it was the first time something had as I want to say. I was conscious and very alert, and yet, it allowed, there was an allowing, it's called mounting, or different things where you allow these spirits to work through you. The hollow bone, oftentimes, I've heard medicine people speak of being that hollow bone and allowing spirit to move through you. This spirit that came through actually had, an attachment to an archetype and attachment to our mythology, the Tiamat, if you're familiar with her, amazing creation story. Also related to dragons and interdimensional. I guess the way that I'm kind of framing it right now is that story might be a way of explaining the cosmic bang that goes off, because actually there is a making of the earth from the feminine body. It's birthed into this dimension. It's very, very powerful, very old story. So that came through, and following that, and there was a wonderful exchange of information and healing. It's very powerful, and that's a long story what occurred. But the takeaway really was that in this exchange, when we were done, I just after having seen reality and experienced co-experienced reality with such a powerful archetype. That she was just like, push the veils aside. She's like, just no longer, just like, this stuff that is meaningless to you, that is of no, just push it aside, push these veils aside. And she just threw them back, and she said part of that is just refusing to participate in these things and put your energy in these other places, and nourish and feed yourself. And so I have to say that, like, she has just been dynamite. I've not had any negative. I should rather reframe that. My experiences with the Drago reptilians is very positive, and what I was told today to say, or what came through, was that we're a very, very old, very large family. Okay. And just how there are people in your family that you struggle to get along with, also within, the Drago reptilian lineage, there are conflicts, there are differences of opinion, there are people, there are beings that are just like, oh, I wish they were different and more this and less of this and this and that and the other thing. And at the same time, there is that gift of the hunger for survival, that sort of relentless perseverance for survival. And when that is in balance with the acceptance of the abundance of the universe, and it's no longer fear-based, and it's actually feeding creation, glory, amazing. So I am very thankful for my inheritance, and as some people are reporting, the energies would come in and spirits would speak, and there would be a communication of some royal lineage. And yes, this has also been communicated to me, and I've found myself during the initial experiences actually giving testimony on certain things in along that timeline in which we were living before, and participating on the galactic level in communication. And the beautiful thing is really just how I felt afterwards, the empowering clarity that comes as a result, and the experience of belonging. which is very, and love. Just incredible, incredible love. Just, it's there. And it's there in a lot of different forms, including reptilian, including Drago. So, imagine dragons. I do. And they are now... Yeah. So, thanks for listening, and namaste.